Hello, everyone, and good evening, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill on YouTube. And joining us today is an author making their official debut here on the show. Now, my guest today is the author of the book series Project Suncloud, as well as other forthcoming horror novels. He is the visual artist for all art products related to his novels, and he's also the frontman and lead guitarist for the Las Vegas punk rock band Futilitarian Librarians. This multi-talented artist is always busy with a creative project in one form or another. Born in Las Vegas, Nevada, to a pair of professional dancers, he has been professionally involved in the arts since the young age of 9, when he landed his first professional job in acting and modeling. He's always been a storyteller, writing stories since he was a child and grew up drawing. And besides writing, drawing, playing, and performing with his band, he also writes as a film critic for FilmSnobs Review. And when not doing anything artistic, he enjoys watching horror movies, playing vintage video games, and spending time with his cat slash co-author, Arya Stark. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a huge round of applause to our guest today, Mr. Nick Ripley. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Awesome, Nick. I am so very excited and so very, very happy to have you here on the show. Now, before we dive into the questions, I would like to give you the opportunity to share with the viewers and listeners a little teaser of your books, a little pitch, you could say.
Well, they can be rather controversial at times. I'll say that. They're known for getting under readers' skin in a good way, and generally I don't shy away from some of the more harsher topics of life. I'm very much so confrontational about that, and all my work is usually about something. It's not just surface level gore and horror, although I do like that stuff.
Nice. Very, very nice. Now, in this series of yours, Project Suncloud, what is the first book in this series? And I understand you also had a book recently come out, correct?
Yes. So the first book of Project Suncloud, I had to split into 2 parts. It's called A Winter for Doves, and it's kind of the first story arc of the entire series. And the next 2 installments should be coming out, I want to say sometime next year, or if not the year after. It's currently being edited. And then the book I just released last year is a standalone horror novel named Aberration. That's probably the majority of what I'm going to be talking about today. Yeah.
Nice. Very, very nice. So let's just start at the very beginning of your journey. Now, from your bio, you have been like ingrained in the arts since you were very, very little. I mean, you've done acting, modeling, you are part of your own band, you also do so many things. So I'm very curious, throughout your early years in the arts world, when did you get the bug, the writing bug, so to speak, to delve into that side of the arts?
So the writing bug really came quite early. From the beginning, I was always making my own stories, but it wasn't until about 7th grade that that an English teacher kind of had these assignments where we would actually write stories, and I found that I really, really fell in love with the whole process, and I became serious about being a novelist at 19 when I first did the first draft of A Winter for Doves. I've been working on this for quite some time, but yeah. So I would say about age 11 was when it really kind of clicked that, hey, this might be something I want to do.
Nice. Very, very nice. So now let's talk about your thought process when it comes to creating these stories. And we're going to start with Project Suncloud because that was the beginning of your journey as an author, and then we'll turn to your more recent work. So, beginning with Project Suncloud, how did that come about? How did the thought process for that set of books really begin your journey as an author to find your voice?
So the interesting thing about Project Suncloud is it's actually a combination of a bunch of different stories I made up when I was a tiny kid.
Mm,
I noticed that upon revisiting them as, I don't want to say like an adult because 19 is not quite an adult, but when I revisited them at 19, I kind of realized there were like very common motifs and themes throughout all these different series. So I was like, why, leave them apart? Why not just combine them all? And at the time, I wanted to do something a little more serious. I'd been working on a comedy comic series beforehand, but real life tragedy happened, and I didn't really feel so funny anymore. So
mm.
I set out to do a grimdark series before I even really knew what grimdark was, and I I had the basic ideas of the story from old stories from when I was a kid. Jared and Aelin, the main two characters, they came to me in dreams back a long time ago. So I've been drawing them for some time, but I finally crystallized them. And then I wrote a bunch of names on the two warring faction sides and just without any sort of character drew random arrows on who kills who because I knew I wanted it to be one of those series where anybody could die kind of thing. So without even coming up with any characters or anything, I just had names and arrows. And then I kind of formulated the whole plot of the series from there.
Nice, nice. All right. Now, for all of your books, what is ultimately the promise you're making, not just to yourself, but to your readers? And ultimately, what is the goal for each book? I know you said that in the beginning, your books evokes a certain kind of an emotion that you want readers to experience.
On the surface level, I hope that it's a bit of a roller coaster. I don't write comfy books. They're very much so, the type of books that will go after your favorite characters and will, take shots where it hurts. But there's always, some real emotion, real points to that. With the Project Suncloud series in general, it's really to kind of show the horrors of humanity and the darker side of it, and that's really what that series is about. And then you have Aberration, which is kind of a more of an exploration of trauma and its lasting effects. So it's on the surface, it's a spooky ghost story that has some very art house trippy elements, but I think that anybody really diving into the subtext can pretty easily see that there's some metaphorical things going on for dealing with CPTSD and whatnot. So it's I try to do a little something with each book where it's not just meaningless violence. There is a point to it. Um, I every book is something that I want to get off my chest and say.
All right. Very nice. Very nice, Nick. Now, this next question is actually a fan question that was sent to me earlier this week from one of my viewers and commenters. And this actually is a really, really nice question. This person would like to ask, when it comes to writing horror, what is your advice to authors in terms of avoiding certain pitfalls in the horror genre?
Ooh, that's a good question and a fan question. I'm so honored. Uh, I would say really try to find what disturbs you. Don't try to don't fall on convention. For Aberration in particular, I I had a segment of time where I had some really bad nightmares that would
Mm,
keep me up, and I drew a lot of inspiration from those nightmares, so that's why it gets very trippy and stuff at points. But I think another way to avoid the pitfalls of horror is keep the emotions real even if it's fantastical. There's a sequence where Rachel, the main character of Aberration, um, has been knocked out by somebody that she thought was friendly, and the terror of not being sure of what his intentions are, and uh, he has this fake facade when she wakes up, and she's trying to suss it out. It pulls from real experience. So I would say the biggest way to avoid pitfalls with horror is draw from things that have genuinely creeped you out. With Aberration, again, there's another character named Miss Jennings, who is this creepy old lady that bugs Rachel and harasses her and whatnot. And she was actually based off a really creepy neighbor that I had that
Mm.
would leave threatening notes and whatnot. And it was a time that I felt that I was in danger, because she would leave these uh, really sloppily handwritten notes attached to my door with children's band-aids. It was really creepy.
Ooh, that is kind of creepy. I'm not gonna lie. And this kind of goes into another fan question from another one of my viewers who asked. So this is a long one. I'm going to summarize as best I can. This person would like to know, like all books and like all stories, there are many subgenres that are very, very popular. Some for right reasons, some for the opposite reasons, and some who have had highs and lows. As an author specializing in horror, what are some of the subgenres that you have noticed that have become popular, and in your opinion, are some more popular than others?
I definitely noticed, at least for a time, that I want to say like paranormal and splatterpunk have been kind of on the rise. And I happen to have a paranormal novel and a splatterpunk novel in the works named Stray, but that's a whole other conversation. But it's not because of trends. I would say that probably the biggest thing that I've been noticing in horror is the rise of extreme horror, that
Mm,
and dark romance. So there's a lot of I it's not my cup of tea personally, but I have noticed there's a lot of like strange like stalker romance things going on, which you know I will reserve judgment on. But
absolutely, absolutely. Now, when it comes to your stories, Nick, I gotta ask: are you more of a pantser or a planner when it comes to writing?
so I always like to call myself a plantser, because I do plan, but I have to leave enough room for interpretation for me to find the story fun. Because if I plan things a little too much, then I don't have the desire to write it. I always like being a little surprised, and it's those moments that catch you off guard that are my favorite. In Project Suncloud, there's a character, a villain named Commander Lee, who I didn't
Mm.
know was going to be my favorite character, but after she had this great, basically improvised speech about like cartoons and why she likes them, as like this really threatening villain monologue, I fell in love with her right away. And it's those kind of
Ah,
moments that you know I can't plan it out too much, or else I'll miss those moments that really make it exciting for me to write.
absolutely, absolutely. Now, going back to characters, this is always a tough question I ask authors because it's like picking your favorite kid. Of the characters you have written, which character was probably your funnest to write, but which character also caused you the most grief in the sense of this character took way too long to develop and you were unsure of where they were going to fit in the narrative?
The most fun character is actually Commander Lee. She was so fun that when I first wrote the series, I decided to make a whole prequel about her, and that's kind of what I'm nailing down. As far as the most frustrating character, um, I wouldn't say like she was hard to develop. I think it was more that with the main character of Aberration, Rachel, I really drew from some some personal experiences. I've said before, and even in the writers forward, that she's like me at the worst part of my life turned up to 11. So it's a very frustrating character because it's you're basically making this hyper extended version of yourself that is like almost, I don't want to say cartoonish because it's been amplified so much, but it's like really amplifying all your flaws and stuff from a certain time period of your life where it's like, I'm not really proud of that. But that was kind of the point of aberration. It was kind of a little mini exercise in exercising the past. So Rachel was definitely probably the most frustrating, and I definitely felt the most devastated working on her stuff.
Absolutely. Very nice. Very nice. Now, this next question, this one I actually thought really hard because I really wanted it to be very special, and I think I nailed it. So I'll give some context for this. So as we've seen in other media, movies and television, well, specifically movies, we've seen the horror genre make a comeback in indie films. Because I know a lot of people have tended to associate horror with gore. And originally, horror was not gore. You could have a great horror film that's more psychological, that plays on your emotions and plays on your senses. It doesn't have to do with gore. And we're seeing that with Obsession, The Back Rooms, and many, many more. And a lot of people have agreed, or at least have seen this trend, that cultural influences lead to the new trends in either media, and that's the same for books. So, Nick, in your opinion, how much do cultural movements or influences help a genre evolve to keep up in the current times?
I think that I think horror in particular has always been a reflection of society's greatest fears. So, the fact that we have Curry Barker, who did Obsession, I think he really hit the nail on the head with Obsession and Gen Z's, fears of the nice guy in that particular movie. And it's, I've always been a proponent that great horror is always not about the monster. It's about the metaphor. Because as fun as the gore is and as fun as the monster can be, I have a lot of fun designing monsters and whatnot, but really the thing that will stick with people is always the message behind the movie. And I think that really has translated well into, it's not as common of a genre anymore, a subgenre anymore, but elevated horror in particular kind of really ran with that, and kind of rediscovered because horror movies have always been more sophisticated than a lot of people give them credit for, but with elevated horror, I feel like it kind of brought to the mainstream the knowledge that, hey, horror could be more than just a guy in a hockey mask. It could be actually about real subjects. And if you really want to look at it, it's always been the trend with horror. I mean, zombies were a metaphor for consumerism, for example, back in George Romero's day, and they were representative of other things too. And I think that really, as long as society exists, there will always be the ghost story, the horror story, because we always need to rationalize the darkest parts, the darkest corners of the world, and give it like a face and find a way to face it.
Well said. Well said, Nick. So now, moving forward in your journey, I'm very curious. When did you, if you ever had the discussion, see yourself not just as a writer anymore, but as an author? And I bring this up because there has always been this discussion of, especially for indie authors and small press authors, of when do we see ourselves no longer as writers of stories, but actual authors? Some people say it's when we publish our first books, and there's some truth to that. But others say it's when we publish a certain number of books that we are now authors because we are very serious. So I'm curious for you, Nick, when did you fully consider yourself an author?
I would say I fully considered myself an author because I had written the entire Project Suncloud series, first drafts since from the time I was 20, and then I didn't actually publish these two until late 20s. So, it'd been some time that I had completed books, but nobody read them, nobody because they weren't out yet, they weren't published, and I had tried to get A Winter for Doves traditionally published, but you know, literary agents, it's a very niche thing what I've done with Project Suncloud. It's not exactly, something that is mainstream. So when I finally saw myself as an author, I would say probably a little bit after publishing, and when I started to get reviews and random strangers started really reading the books and being fans of the Project Suncloud series and wanting to know what would happen to Jared and Aelin, and that's really when it kind of hit me like, hey, like, you know, it's only a few fans. I'm not gonna act like I'm some big indie author, but the fact of the matter is there are people that care about my series and about my books. So in a weird way, now I feel a responsibility to keep that story going, even if it is only for those couple fans that actually read it. I mean,
Yes.
obviously, I wanted to expand, but that's now I feel like that's the responsible thing as an author to keep with it because it's like I have so many other stories to tell that I'll probably be doing this till the day I die.
Well said. Well said, Nick. Now I'm actually very curious. When did you tell your friends and family that you were embarking on this journey initially? Or did they already know from the get-go?
To some degree, they already knew. I've always been a super creative kid. I always had stories. When I first started writing A Winter for Doves, not necessarily including family, but the people I was around weren't the most supportive when I first started, and there really was a lot of pushback of, oh, you're writing a book, and it was definitely an uphill battle, and luckily all those people that were you know doubters, they're either not in my life anymore or they've been proven wrong like 10 times over, and they've accepted that, and they're pretty cool with it. But it definitely it was definitely an uphill battle being taken seriously as an author.
Hmm. That is very true. I think for a lot of us indie authors, we want people to take us seriously as storytellers because we do the research. We read from the masters. We know how to craft stories by learning from them, which leads into my next set of questions, Nick.
Hmm.
What would you say are like I want to say inspirations, but the authors that you research in terms of how they approach the horror genre? And what books would you say have really helped you find your voice?
I would say that I have a broad bunch of authors that really kind of inspired me to write and inspired my voice. I would say I'm not as big of a fan as of him now, but one of the first authors that really got me going was Stephen King.
Okay.
Um, I read Four Past Midnight and I fell in love with it, and Carrie and fell in love with it. Not as big of a fan of his now. I would say nowadays I'm a lot more inspired by Clive Barker and you know um, Telltale Heart, and or not Telltale Heart, Hellbound Heart. Hellbound Heart, Books of Blood, Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles series, quite a bit of grimdark. Joe Abercrombie and his First Law books have really had a heavy influence on me. So it's kind of a wide variety of different hodgepodge, and I also think that there's just a natural, especially with my first person books, I had a background as an actor, and learned sense memory and all that stuff. So really, a lot of times with the first person in particular, it's more just me hearing the character's voice in my head tell me the story as I'm writing, and that's kind of how I interpret it. It's like, the person is talking to me and telling me what went on. And there's little isms, and Rachel Hannigan is one of my most dynamic characters because she has a whole personality that's not just in the actual story but in the narration as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, Nick. And here's another fan question, and I think you've already kind of touched on this in terms of like the pitfalls for authors to avoid. But this fan would like to know, in your opinion, what makes a true horror story?
True horror, that's kind of tough because horror has so many different flavors, and that obviously there's the deeper, I view it as kind of more scary, like metaphorical horror, but to say that that is all that horror is and can be kind of neglects the campier, goofier side of horror, because
Right,
I have equal love for that side too. I mean, my splatterpunk book Stray definitely leans a lot more into the camp and whatnot, and it's still got metaphors in it, but it's a lot goofier and whatnot. So I would say with horror, generally a sense of the macabre. I think horror is beautiful in the way that it could be very loose, and if the Vampire Chronicles can be considered horror, and I don't think, yes, they're dark, but there's elements of their darkness that it's not like your typical like scary slasher. It's
right.
more the isolation of being a vampire and all this stuff. If that could be considered horror, I think that a true horror story can be really anything that you want. You could put horror on any label. Now, is it going to be actually scary? That's a different discussion altogether. But as a genre, horror can be just about anything you call horror.
Absolutely, very true. And I remember talking with another fellow horror author on the show a year or two ago, and in her opinion, I could be wrong, but she said that horror for some people may be seen as like the easiest genre to write in, but in truth, it's probably one of the most difficult because, as you mentioned, Nick, horror is so many things. It is psychological, it's metaphorical. It could be man versus self, man versus nature, man versus anything. And horror, really, in its true form, needs to get like under your skin and make you uncomfortable to be like, afraid of your surroundings. Like in the same way, look at, I remember watching Jaws. Everyone says like the shark, goofy as all can be. But why, even to this day, when we have, updated practical effects, why is that movie still terrifying? It's because you don't see it, the
Hmm.
music builds up, and it just appears out of nowhere. Sometimes the shark is honestly the unknown thing. You don't see it till like the very end.
The thing with horror and comedy are kind of both two sides of the same coin in that a lot of it isn't so much the punchline as it is the buildup. If you
Yes,
can nail the buildup and then deliver on that punchline, you got them. Whether it's horror or comedy, which is why horror comedies work so well, because it really is just going back and forth with the
absolutely.
same techniques, and that's why Jaws is so scary, is because we don't see that shark, and one of the elements that is the most frightening to the human mind is that of the unknown. As long as things are known, we feel like we can rationalize things, we can feel safe, and when we are left questioning, we're a lot more at unease. And that was actually something that I really tried to play with Aberration. I really tried to not give straightforward answers to the audience and kind of leave a lot of things to interpretation so they can be a little more creeped out. Because I feel like if you don't answer questions, I mean, David Lynch is one of the greatest horror directors of all time, in my opinion. But if you look at his films, they're not traditional horror films,
Correct.
but they're very interpretive and very, very creepy. And I would say that I've gotten way more creeped out from movies like Eraserhead than, the majority of horror movies that get pushed out, like especially by Blumhouse.
Yeah, it's like the unsettlingness that is what's really the unnerving thing. It's not so much like the fear, it's just like you feel like, again, unnerved by what you're seeing or what you are hearing. And I really think a good example of that, I think a lot of horror authors can look at for research, and also in terms of, appealing to the senses, is the most recent horror film that followed this young girl on a podcast, and she had the tapes on her show, and it's just her in a room with like the audio. I forgot the name, but it's so simplistic, but it's so good because it capitalizes on the space, the very isolated space.
Yeah, God, what was that movie? It was playing at Sundance this year. It's gonna
Mm.
something tone or something. It's gonna bug me. I'm gonna like look it up afterwards and be like, that's what the name of it was. But yeah, no, it is very much so. You could do a lot with very little with horror, which is why you don't necessarily for horror film. You don't necessarily need a big budget to make a great horror film.
No.
You just need well-timed shots, well-planned sequences, and you're golden. You can make a lot of things super scary without going over the top. I actually think some of the scariest scenes I've written are a lot more subtle. Like I have, monsters eating people and stuff like that, but it's stuff like, where a stranger in aberration is talking to Rachel and then says something that catches her off guard that the stranger shouldn't know, and is like looking at her a certain way that makes her think, what's going on? Why, how did they know that? That to me is some of the best horror, that subtextual, lingering, more realistic horror, because it gets under your skin a lot more that
Well
way.
said. Well said again, Nick. And that kind of goes into something that you just talked about. You don't need a big budget to write a good horror film. I think it can be said in terms of, being an indie author, especially horror indie authors, because for all of us, marketing our books and being authors in a digital age is not easy. It's a double-edged sword. We allow ourselves to be exposed to the internet, and everybody expects, horror to be a certain way or certain subgenre because that's what's trending, that's what's most popular. And, that's kind of like the good things and the bad thing about being an author. Is like, for me, my background is like in historical fiction and fantasy, but romantasy is like dominating the fantasy genre. And everyone
Mhm.
thinks romantasy is just that, or fantasy is just that. It's not. It is so many subgenres. It's dark fantasy, it's epic fantasy. Same with
Mhm.
horror. People assume horror and gore are the same thing. And while that may be true, as you've mentioned, and probably as you've read as well as a reader, horror encapsulates so many things. You have dark academia, you have thrillers, and many, many more. So I'm very curious, Nick, if you can share with us some of your experiences of being an author in the digital age and what you have learned about, the social media side of the industry.
Um, I have learned that it is very, very tricky to navigate. It's not easy at all, and at times it really can be a bit of a thankless job. But the thing is, and this is the thing that I think makes a lot of indie authors fold, because they are trying to constantly look for that audience, and sometimes it's really hard to get people's attention. I've seen
Yes.
many indie authors give up, and it's real shame. But I think, and this is something that I've had to deal with specifically, I think you have to remember, if you're being an indie author, to write for yourself first and
Yes.
foremost. Because even if nobody else reads the books, you got to do what you got to do. You got to put to page what you want to put, because you're not answering to anybody. You're telling a story. You need to do the writing for yourself. And readers come and go. Like, I've had times where I've had a decent amount of readers. I've had times where it seemed like it was the Mojave Desert. But the best thing to keep saying through those dry spots is, okay, I'm not attracting the crowd, but maybe that's not something that I need to be trying to do. Maybe I need to get in touch with myself and really touch upon why I'm doing this, and really find the love in the craft again.
Yes,
And
again, very true.
I think that is the key to surviving as an indie author. You really have to love what you're doing. And even if you get a negative review here, even if you get whatever, you got to keep in mind your stories will not be for everyone. It's just impossible to appeal to many people. And why would you want to? Do you like everyone? I know I don't like everyone. So you want to find your people, and even if it's a small group, you want to be sure to keep them happy. And even other than just them, you need to keep yourself happy. You should be the main audience for your own books. If you're not digging your own books, people won't be into it. You know what I mean?
Very true. Very well said again, Nick. And I'm very curious, is that almost kind of like the same, like the mentality and drive that you and your fellow bandmates have when you guys are performing songs and going to spots to showcase your songs and your authentic side?
Oh, most certainly. I mean, Futilitarian Librarians has had a lot of highs and lows in our very short, very indie career, from band member deaths and, all sorts of crazy things, a lot of drama behind the scenes. But the thing that's really kept us going as a group is very much so that thing, finding the joy in the actual act of creating again, and finding the joy in doing what we do, performing. You know, some nights you're out there in front of an audience and that audience is just not vibing you. Maybe you're a punk band that got booked with a bunch of jazz bands, and the audience is there to see jazz bands, not a punk band. So they're really not vibing you. That's happened to us before. But the thing to keep, strong through that is, what? You just gotta have this idea of, screw them. I'm gonna do this for me. At the end of the day, this is a vanity project, and I'm gonna do it for me, and I'm gonna feel good about doing it for me. And if somebody else enjoys it, awesome. I love that. But I'm also just not going to try to completely appeal to people that just won't even give my work a look, because it's just not their thing.
Yes, that is very, very true. And that's the thing for all indies, as we've talked about, is trying to find our audience is not easy. Social media can help connect with some people, but it's not the end all be all. Sometimes there's a lot of trial and error. We have to go through the fire in the flames, so to speak, and really find out who exactly we are and is this the industry we want to be in, because there is no guarantee we're going to be financial success in either we are an author or we are musicians, but we still have to be passionate about, because we are putting time, effort, and a lot of work into it. And if we're not passionate about it, our fans and our readers are going to pick that up as well, which then leads into the topic of marketing our books. Now, in the beginning, Nick, as I said, to have you give your own best pitch of your book, I find that to be probably the biggest thing that a lot of authors struggle with. I myself struggle with the pitch as well, whether going to like a tabling event or an author event. So, for you, when you are at a table promoting your books, what has sort of been like the trial and error that you have discovered works best in terms of pitching your stories? You make connections with previous books that already exist, or maybe films that evoke the same feeling.
So, I think I may have misunderstood the initial question as a pitch, but for example, for aberration, in like 3 lines, uh, aberration is about a fashion photographer who takes a photo of a dead body at a car accident and soon finds herself possibly being stalked by another worldly being. It's a psychological horror story with elements of the paranormal and very gory body horror. Reader discretion advised. Um, with a lot of the marketing sense of things, it's it really is about finding kind of the broad strokes that will interest people, and it's a delicate art because as writers we get so caught up in like the little details of our stories,
Hmm.
like in that little it's not even I mean it's a pitch, but it's not a pitch. I didn't even mention that the majority of the story takes place on a Hawaiian vacation,
Ooh.
but yeah, a little bit of a different setting there for a horror story, but it really is about cutting the fat and getting to the basic premise of the story. Why should they care? Why should they pick it up? Why should they take the time? And with marketing, probably my best tool was kind of found by accident. And this actually leads into my digital art. Um, it is my art. Um, that's really been kind of like the major way that I've really found my readers is they get attracted to my art and they want to see what it's about. And that whole process was a very accidental one. Somebody in the Twitter writing community, I think I posted like a tweet like, "Oh, I'm almost finished with a painting," and then they DM'd me and they're like, "You paint? What are you doing?" And I showed them, and they're like, "You need to like post these. These are decent." And at the time, I was first starting out, so I wouldn't say that they were the quality that they are today, but it wound up being honestly kind of my best marketing tool because a picture says so much. And on that note, I think that one thing for marketing that one should really invest in is great visuals.
Yes, very, very true.
And always by an actual artist, no AI, because not only do people not like AI, but there's always the thought of if the cover is AI, is the writing AI?
Hmm. That is
And
very true.
so I definitely hire real artists. I know it's expensive, but every part of being an independent, whatever, is going to be expensive, and you're going to have to shell out money for it. And taking easy ways out, especially in marketing, is one of the worst things that you could do. You got to really put your all into it, and maybe it'll attract people, maybe it won't, but it's really it's at least a first step towards getting readers. Good marketing.
Hmm. Absolutely. So let's talk about a little bit of your background as an artist as well. As you said that you are a digital artist, and just like stories and how we write, art is also very individualistic in terms of how we approach that medium as well. So, what got you interested in art, and how did you find your voice in that medium?
So with art and stories for me have always gone together like PB and J. Like from when I was a little kid, I always drew my characters. Actually, for Suncloud, one of my earliest, I have like entire little notebooks of random little character, or not little, but random characters that I would just draw all the time. Monsters I would draw like, oh, these are the aliens, and these are the ones attacking humanity, and all this stuff. And it it's kind of a conceptual tool for me. Like I feel like when I'm really cooking with grease on a story, it's always kind of a relief, of pressure of some sort to actually draw the character so I can actually visualize, and it goes hand in hand with the story too, and it informs sometimes certain things about like what I'm writing. So it's almost kind of part of the process. Now with my own art style and whatnot, that actually has been quite the journey because I obviously, like a lot of 2000s millennials, got started drawing anime and manga.
Mm-hmm.
And I still draw anime and manga. I'm working on a Project Suncloud manga, but eventually I got sick of drawing that, and I wanted to do comic books. So I worked on comic books for a while, trying to adopt a little bit more of a realistic style. And I would say that my art style now is very inspired by photos. I pull a lot of references for every piece that I do. Like if I'm doing a grotesque monster, I'm going to look up, photos of diseases and really gross, gnarly things, so I know what the texture of all that looks like, so I could try to translate it as accurately as possible into the art. And I found there's little things like I use a certain brush for my line art. I use certain paint tools in the digital art that I've found through trial and error. A lot of it's just experimentation and trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where we've wound up with my kind of unique, gritty style that apparently is very easy to spot no matter how hard I try to hide it.
Awesome, Nick. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you so very, very much. And we are almost near the end of this incredible author interview. But before we get to that, I did want to ask you this question. Who would you say are some of like the biggest supporters beyond family and friends who have really helped you find your voice as an author, as a fellow creative, and have also given you guidance along the way?
So obviously my editor is huge, Rachel. I believe you pronounce her last name Ostrich. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, but she has been just she's been my faithful editor throughout every single thing. I've only ever really had online interactions with her. I haven't talked to her face to face, but she is always pointing me in the right direction in terms of being conscientious and getting rid of extra fluff. I would say that I have some very dedicated fellow authors that are also some of my biggest readers, like Midori Enzai, Jade Black, Alexi Thomas, Carl Bluesy. I definitely owe a lot to them. Casey Offenthi. They're all really good friends, and they're all really talented writers themselves, and I'm very honored. And I found them all through Twitter back when writing Twitter was a lot more active, and it's that old Twitter community, old writing Twitter community really is probably what helped prop me up to here. And I'm not so sure I would have released books if it weren't for the amazing friends that I made along the way.
Well said, Nick.
Thank you to all of you if you're listening.
I'm sure they are. I am sure they are, Nick. And to wrap up this incredible authors interview here on the show, ultimately, at the end of the day, Nick, for your stories and for your forthcoming stories in the future, what do you hope readers will take away from how you approach storytelling?
I hope they get a sense of storytelling that only I can really tell. I always try to approach every, conventional genres with my own twist. So almost kind of a Ripley twist on it. And I hope that, they really walk away from stories feeling something, whether that be, anger, dread, or, happiness, or, some sort of bittersweet emotion. As long as readers are genuinely feeling something, I think I've done my job.
Again, a perfect answer, Nick. Absolutely. And a fitting conclusion to this incredible late night author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Nick Ripley for coming on the show, making its official debut. Now, Nick, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and connect, as well as purchase your books? And for my fans in the Las Vegas area, Nick, where can they find you and your band performing? Do you have any upcoming announcements on that?
So for the band, we're currently on hiatus. We're trying to work on our lineup a little bit, but so no current things. We're working on stuff behind the scenes. Possibly a new album in the works, possibly. But in terms of where you could find my books, Amazon and Barnes and Noble, you could get Aberration. I think at the moment you could only get Project Suncloud off Amazon and other online book retailers that aren't Barnes and Noble. I will be doing a signing, I believe, I want to say it's October 14th. I'll have to double check the date, but October 14th in Henderson, Barnes and Noble for Aberration. So for any Vegas listeners, if you want to say hi, you know, I'll be there.
Awesome. Very, very nice, Nick. Thank you so much. I'll link all that down below in the description of this video. And viewers and listeners, I know you, for those who have been following me on my social media, I have brought back the Roundtable series. If you would like to see Nick back on the show for an all horror roundtable event, maybe closer to Halloween to fit the theme, you know you have to do. Like this video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill, signing out. Wish you all a wonderful evening wherever you are in the world. And we will see you all next time in the next episode. Take care and have a wonderful day.